Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take that nasty thing out and fill it with that. And those are all the tools that you're going to need. A couple of wedges, one big, one less big. Small hammer, that's a 1/4 inch ratchet with a 10mm socket on it, but you could just as easily get another 10mm socket for your 3/8. We all know how that goes though. That was the one I could find. Got an 18 and a 19 socket, 17 and a 19 wrench. You may want an 18 wrench too, just in case. Got some extra cotter pins, big sledge, well, small sledge, medium-sized sledge, bigger than that hammer, PB blaster, or some other lubricant, I don't care. 32mm socket, angle cutters, needle nose pliers, blue thread locker because it's what I had in the drawer, small screwdriver, some brake clean, couple of bungee cords, red grease, jack stand, car. Got to get this guy out of the way first. Caliper's up next. Got a whole brake video. I'll put it right here in case you want to look at it and see how to remove that bad boy. Once that's out of the way, we'll talk about this axle nut cover. Brake caliper's out of the way. Rotor fell right off because it was a recent brake job. Sweet. Anyhow, next thing is to compare the new part with the old part. Looking here at the new one, axle space. This seems to be about the same diameter as this guy. And then 4 bolts running. Oh God, it's gonna be so tight. Oh, I'm already miserable and we hadn't even really gotten started yet. These bolts go in right there. Looks like we're gonna be Vinny D in that wrench for a while. Here's a better look at those 4 bolts with a little bit of extra light. See how tight that's gonna be? Probably gonna have to run them out rather, all at the same time, and then a little bit at a time going back in. This is gonna be a fun one, fellas. And ladies, if you're out there watching this. I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on getting this axle nut cover off, because that probably needs to come out next so we can pull the axle nut out so it's out of the way. Just gonna use a screwdriver or a wedge here. Oh, just so happen to have one right here on the floor. Dink! We're just gonna wedge it out. I ended up starting with a screwdriver to get a little bit smaller head here. And I just went tap, 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 all the way around till I created a gap. Then I stuck the wedge in and gave it a couple of good firm whacks and boop, off it popped. Next job is removing the cotter pin out of the axle nut and this little protector here to keep it locked in. Make sure you have some extra cotter pins lying around just in case. Pair of dikes, shit. Pair of angle cutters, pair of needle nose ought to get this job done real fast. Cotter pin, little safety washer, safely tucked away in the magnet bowl. This guy's coming off. That's a, what is that? 35 mm. 35. Dude, if you're watching this video before you actually do the job, which I hope you are, at your earliest convenience, when you can see these guys, go ahead and soak them with PB blaster, just in case they are frozen. I was lucky. They were not frozen in my case. They're a 17. 17, only goes once in a lifetime, something like that, I think. Okay, anyways, moving on. I recommend using the old wrench and tap method. Get you a hammer, tap it, make sort of an impact tool, because you can't get a socket in there. You're not getting an impact tool in there by any stretch of the imagination. Give it a few good solid taps while you're holding the wrench, and it'll come right free. No big deal. In order to make this easy, because if you look at the new part, you have exactly enough room with each bolt when you turn it. I've gone ahead and loosened all 4 of these, and that way I can pull them out sort of one at a time, and then hopefully everything will just slide right out without a puller. But if we need a puller, I got one. Got all 4 of these bolts backed out as far as I can. All the way around. I don't know what's gonna happen when I yank on it, but I'm gonna give it a yank. Looks like it's already starting to separate, so it might actually come out pretty easy. I'm gonna pull on a little bit. If I need to, I'll use a hammer. If I absolutely need to, I'll stick a wedge right in there, because there's already a gap forming, which is cool. Maybe this thing will come out real easy. Fingers crossed. There it is. It's out. Here's what I did. Took a big wedge. Well, I took a little wedge and I exploited that gap until I could get enough room to get a big wedge in. And then once I could get a big wedge in, I just separated it going around the outside, all 4, kind of using both wedges together until there was enough room that I could just whack it with a sledgehammer. And then I took a little mini sledge, boom, 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 3 or 4 times, and off it popped right after that. It probably took about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of beating on it. But you know what? It's out. Did a confirmatory test, and when I spun the bearing, if we listen to it, you can just barely hear it. When you're holding on to it, when I'm holding on to it, I can feel those ball bearings just gross in there. Definitely the right part to replace. Okay, cleaned this out with a rag. There was some sort of a rubbery kind of gunk and an O-ring. I believe those are leftover parts that fell out of this old bearing because it's blasting grease out of this seal right here real bad. Well, I'm gonna re-grease our axle shaft and pop our new one in. Don't forget your dust shield. Gotta remove this sensor before we can get anything else out. It's a 10mm. I suppose this next step is dealer's choice, whether or not you're interested. I have a new dust seal. Voila. The old one comes out of the back though, which means we gotta remove the axle, which actually was super easy. There's 2 18s right here, zip those guys out, and everything just slid right out. I'm not gonna tell you gotta do this, but ours is in bad shape, and it is gross And, well, you know, customer's kind of important. It's not me, but she'll be happy that she don't have to worry about anything. Plus, looks like this axle's gonna need to be replaced before too much longer anyways. It's gross and also kind of leaking. Now I know how to do it. I don't want to do it today though. Plus, I don't have the parts. Anyhow, gonna change the dust seal out. I'm just gonna pop it out with one of those wedges, and then I'll pop the new one in, slide everything back together. Oh, don't be surprised. This thing's gonna release a little bit of tension because the spring is gonna press down. So we'll have to use the jack probably to lift it back into place. Put a little red grease in there. Just kind of slid the new seal in part way. It's probably still gonna require some tapping to get it fully seated, but at least we're started, and the red grease will kind of help slide it in and deal with some of the rust problems that are in there. But I'm just gonna use a tiny little hammer and a little tapping and be fine. I don't know what size I said these bolts down here are, but they're actually a 19. They go this way. Anyhow, if you're gonna change the dust seal, if you're gonna pull the axle out, you'll want to release those. Yeah, I know, it's gonna be a pain in the ass when we put all that back together. But that's okay, it's worth it. Next, yeah, we'll put the axle back in. We'll grease it up. We'll put the lower control arm back in. And then once that's assembled, wheel bearing. Got the jack in place, back on the control arm a bit, so things aren't moving around. Getting myself real close to this particular bolt being lined up. I can move this part around a little bit, give myself a little bit more leverage. And one thing I noticed is that these old bolts had a little Loctite on them, so I'm gonna throw a little bit back on just to make sure they stay in. I got those two lower control arm bolts just hand tightish or so. Drop the sensor back in here. I'll put the bolt back in and get it locked in so I don't forget it, because I don't want to forget this. I feel like that would be a problem later, but you know, who knows. Went on ahead and used the zip those on real tight, make sure that there's absolutely no question about how tight. The next step will be the dust shield. Dust shield doesn't really want to stay on its own. We're gonna grease this thing up instead. Yeah. Never forget to grease your axle a little bit. Just makes things easier coming apart and everything just works better. Just do it. A little red grease never hurt anybody. My kit came with a new rubber O-ring, so I stuck it on there. Right there. And now I'm gonna start sliding things together. Got a little red grease inside this side too, just to make sure there's nothing holding us up. Took our dust shield, kind of slid the bolts in just a little bit, but not very much. And then just kind of set the wheel bearing in, using the axle to help guide it in. Fiddled, just fiddle, take your time. Notice that none of these bolts are flush. There's lots of space left. Haven't even started pulling it in yet. Just gonna get a couple of threads on each one and then go slowly in a star pattern. Star patterns never hurt anybody. They're good for everyone. Figure, can't mess it up with a star pattern, but we wanna pull it in a little bit at a time. And so that's the next step. Just start working it ever so slowly. Okie dokie, got all 4 bolts tight. Used about 3/4 of a Tim, which is just short of half a dale. Yeah, 1/4 of a dale. Just short of 1/4 of a dale, maybe 3/4 of a Tim, plus a couple of taparoos. I used the wrench and I tapped it tight the same way that I told you guys to loosen it. Just a couple of taps to give it a little bit of extra, like, impacty. And it seems pretty good. Very nice. Next, axle nut. The axle nut pretty much just went on by hand with just a tiny little zip from the old gun. Then put our little locker on there. Something tells me maybe I should use a new cotter pin, but who knows? Maybe I will, maybe I won't. What the heck, I got some new ones. I'll throw a new one in there. Got our cotter pin in place. Bent it back the way that it came from the factory. No big deal. Dust shield's next. Should be fairly simple to just plop it in there and give her a couple of quick taps. You guys aren't gonna believe me, but I'll be danged if that wasn't the hardest job I've done so far. All right, calipers next. No, scratch that. Rotor's next. Calipers directly after that. Rotor, boom. There it is, boys and girls. Job is done. No big deal. Throw the wheel on, call it good. Easy peasy. All right, okie dokie. All right. Okay. All right, I just moved the whole camera and that was dumb. Kyle, let me be quite honest. I apologize for having messed up your whole editing world.